Hey Rogue Trotters, thanks for tuning in. I'm up here on Wagner Butte, and I just thought I would take the time, to, well, first of all, show these sort of relics of ancient man up here, now that we're among these monuments, proofs of our civilization from ancient times. These ziggurats built by ancient humans or creatures from another planet to any future life forms in the distant future to discover these. I'd say these were of religious significance to ancient man. I thought I would do something different, a little departure from our normal routine to help us hover above our normal, our routines, our habits in life, and take us on a journey. I want to tell a story today that takes us into the deep past. So I like to call this story Blame the Witch. And it goes like this. There was once a young duke in Wales. His name was Butte. And he had recently married a young lady who was the finest young lady in all the kingdom. And her beauty was told far and wide. And even her name sort of described her beauty. Her name was Gerfud. And so Butte and Gerfud had been married only a short time. And they were very happy, but they were unhappy in only one way. And that is that they could not seem, try as they might, to be able to conceive a child, which they wanted very badly. And so did the duchy. The duchy wanted an heir, a duke, to carry on the tradition. But try as they might, they couldn't do it. And no fault of their own, they were up for the task. And Gerfud was virulent and Butte, well, he was no Onanite. So, as time passed, Gerfud became more and more distraught. And more quiet desperation entered Gerfud's heart. Until she was advised by her lady's maid to seek the counsel of an old woman that lived deep in the forest, in the deepest, darkest part of the forest. Now, the forest was not a place for a lady at the time. It was full of creatures, devils, and Hilfhundinger, half hound, half man. There were beasts of every sort, dragons and griffins. Hilfhundinger. So it was with much trepidation that Gerfud entered the forest. But she did this. She was very determined. And so she went into the dank, drippy darkness. And she found there an old hovel built into the side of the cliff. Smoke pouring from the chimney, and she thought this must be the place. And in the hovel was the old woman spinning at yarn. Her name was Grimhild, but she stopped when she saw Gerfud, for she knew immediately what was the matter. She had sort of a sense of these things. And she said, "I can help. I have a remedy. but you must listen very carefully to what I say. Grimhild produced 2 roses. The 2 roses were 2 different colors, white and red, and she said, "Listen very carefully. When you go home, before you are about to lie with your husband, eat one of these roses, but only one, mind you. For the day that you eat both roses, heavy doom will befall." And she was right. So when Gerfud came home, before she was about to lay down with her husband, she was so excited. She felt that the charm of the roses was going to be very powerful indeed. Her mind was far in the future, with a baby boy and heir at her bosom. And so she forgot the old woman's advice. And she ate both roses, only remembering after it was too late that she heeded the old woman's advice only in part. Now the charm of the roses must have worked a treat, because she was pregnant that very evening, and she discovered this about a month later. And she was so pleased that she forgot all about the advice of Grimhild. And in the due time, she was in the throes of labor with her lady's maid, there as the baby catcher. And she was giving birth. She was giving birth in a way that only a duchess can. And the lady's maid was at the ready to catch the baby. But neither of them knew that Gerfud was pregnant with twins. But the first thing that came out wasn't a baby at all. It was a snake. And the lady's maid held it. She didn't know what to do with it, so she threw it out the window. Luckily, the second thing that came out was a healthy baby boy, the most beautiful child in all the kingdom. Not just one heir, but 2. The second baby was a beautiful baby boy, and as he grew, it was known throughout the land that he was one of the most beautiful princes to ever live. And everyone was happy. Everyone celebrated his birth and his upbringing. He was brought up in the noble fashion. But little did he know that he had a twin brother. And that twin brother was growing into a Lyndwrm. Now a Lyndwrm is a half man, half dragon. And this is what the serpent became. Some called him Nagelfair, the road that is riveted to our lives. Some called him Sevenskins, because of his thick skin. For as his brother grew, so grew Sevenskins, and so grew his crimes. And each crime that he committed, his skin became thicker and thicker, until no arrow or lance could pierce it. He was invincible to all onslaught and all reproach. And he lived in his den sulking on his hoard. And as his skins got thicker and his muscly tone got musclier, the squire was growing into a fine lad. And one day, when he was round about 18 years old, he asked his father, "Father, I should go to marry." And his father said, "Yes, of course it would do us great honor for you to produce an heir." And so, the lad did this, and he went into a neighboring kingdom and he found himself the most winsome maid he could find. And he took her back to his duchy, where they were to be married in the chapel. And the bells rang, and throughout all the kingdom, there was a much hullabaloo for the marriage. And folks came from near and far. But little did this young squire know there was an uninvited guest coming. And this was his twin brother, Sevenskins. Now, when the squire and the young maid were at the altar, and the squire was about to put the ring on her finger, the doors were flung open, and there stood Naglfar, steam coming from his nostrils, backlit by the sun. There was a scream throughout the chapel. Everyone fled to the sides like the parting of a sea, and Naglfar strode down the aisle with his finger held out, pointing at the groom, and he said, "You." And the groom, very puzzled, felt like he'd seen this dragon man somewhere before, but he couldn't quite remember. "You." "What?" And he said, "I've got a name." And Naglfar was flummoxed. He said, What is it then?" "Dennis." "Dennis, then." "What?" What? What were you gonna say?" "You, Dennis, you are my brother." And there was a gasp throughout the chapel, and Gerfud and her lady's maid remembered the snake that they defenestrated 18 years hence. "You are my brother, and I am the eldest. Therefore, I must have the first bride." With that, he snatched the bride away, straight from the altar, and he carried her back to his lair, where he gobbled her right up. Because by rights, he was the eldest brother, and therefore he was entitled to be married before Dennis. And Dennis was distraught, and Puth was distraught, and Gerfud wrung her hands, remembering the serpent. What happened was this: many, many maidens were produced to be wed to the dragon, Sevenskins, and every time he carried her back to his lair, and he gobbled him right up. And it came to pass that there became a shortage of maidens in the duchy, and this became a big problem. Now, out in the countryside, there lived a poor mule skinner's daughter. Her name was Cynwellyn, and her turn was up to marry the dragon. And the day before her wedding, she was busy at her work, skinning mules, and she was up to her elbows in grime. She was near the forest, and out from the forest came an old woman in a cowl. And the old woman approached and said, "Cynwellyn, are you to marry the dragon tomorrow?" And Cynwellyn said, "Yes. My father is much distraught, for I'm the only one to help him skin his mules." And the old woman said, "I will give you some advice." And she clutched Cynwellyn's head in her bony hands and whispered in her ear, whispering, whispering, until Cynwellyn said, "Dear me." So the next day, Cynwellyn was to be wed to Naglfar. But what she did first was follow Grimhild's advice. And she wore 7 dresses to the wedding. 7 garments she wore. And she went, she did her duty and was married to Naglfar, who carried her back to his lair, as usual. And when they got there, and before he was about to gobble her up, he said, "Take off that dress." And she said, "Not until you take off one of your skins." And he said, he was flummoxed and said, "How's this? How must I take off my skin?" And she said, "I know how. I have prepared you a bath. For you must take a bath, not only to help remove your skin, but also because you smell. You smell like dirty pants." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry. I suppose I ought to take a bath." She said, "Now get in the bath." So he did. He got in the bath, but he didn't know that the water of the bath was lye. And she had a pumice stone and she scrubbed him. And as she scrubbed him with the lye and the pumice, he yowled in pain, he shrieked in pain, "No! And his skin carapace, his heavy scales began to fall from him, and one layer of his skin was shed from him, and he was green underneath. And he said, "Oh, no more, but please remove your dress as you have told." And she said, "Okay," and she did. She removed one dress, and to his surprise, she still had another dress underneath. He said, "Now take off that dress." And she said, "Not till you take another bath, because now you smell even worse like pants." And he said, "Oh, very well." And they repeated the same thing. She scrubbed him, and she used loofah sponges and exfoliating creams, and she scrubbed and scrubbed, and he yowled in pain, and his carapace came off again. A heavy shell like a beetle. He said, "Very well, now take off that other dress. Take off that dress." Well, see, he didn't know that she was wearing 7. And she said, "Not until you take another bath." And he said, "Oh, very well." And and again, she bathed him. And each time she bathed him, she removed another layer of his skin, and he became more and more green, more and more soft, until the final layer was removed from him, and her final dress was removed, and they were both stood naked before each other. And the final bath was in milk, and they emerged from that triumphant, new creatures, newly made. He was no longer a half-dragon, but now he was fully man. And Naglfar was no more. He was now the true heir to the duchy. And they lived happily ever after. They made unguents and exfoliating creams, and they sold them at the co-op or whatever. And they, you know, they made like different oils, oil of old lady, and loofah sponges, and they had this whole treatment worked out where you're supposed to soak in lye and then scrub, and they were happy. And Dennis was happy as well. He never really wanted to marry. He said, "Father, I never really wanted to marry. All I wanted to do was sing." And he would sing, and everyone was like, "That's great." And he would sing, and he would play with those, they're like these little like swizzle sticks that you, like in the 90s, ravers used to play with. You know these ones? They're like rubber sticks, and they have like a pom-pom on each end or whatever. And you like toss them in the air and twirl them around, and you wear like really big pants, like a wallet chain. So he just did that. He was like happy as a clam. He went to Burning Man. And yeah, everyone was happy. The Cynwelyn produced many heirs, and that, you know, that was the most important thing, of course. You know, it's not happily ever after, it's like many children ever after. But thought I would tell that story among these relics of ancient man. Kind of inspiration. If you liked this story, please subscribe. Click here or here, there. I don't know where those buttons end up. I didn't pay for the premium just YouTube service, but anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. This is a crown of thorns for a giant.